This government has pushed geographic inequalities to the top of its policy agenda. In his very first speech as Prime Minister, Boris Johnson made clear his intent to boost economic performance outside of London and the South East, to level up across the country, and to revive the fortunes of the UK's left-behind towns and cities.
We are going to unite and level up. Unite and level up, bringing together the whole of this incredible United Kingdom.
But how regionally unequal is the UK, and how does this compare to other countries? There are substantial differences in earnings, productivity, wealth, health, educational attainment, and social mobility across different parts of the UK. Average annual earnings in London are 30% higher than the UK average, and 50% higher than in the North East, for example. But it's not just a simple case of London and the South East versus the rest. The inequalities within regions are larger than the inequalities between regions. Still, the UK is among the most regionally unequal countries in the developed world. On a wide variety of measures, regional disparities in the UK are greater than in most comparable countries. These regional inequalities are deep-rooted. As far back as 1901, GDP per person in London was 34% higher than the average for Great Britain. Levelling up will need to be a long-term agenda, stretching beyond a single parliament, with joined-up policies in areas like education, tax, investment, culture and health, if it is to succeed where other governments have failed in the past. So which areas might the government target for levelling up? Our research combines measures of pay, employment, formal education and incapacity benefits to identify which areas might be considered left behind and in need of levelling up. This map shows how local authorities in Great Britain perform on this measure, with areas identified as more left behind shaded darker red and areas performing better on our measure shaded dark blue. Left behind places can be found across the country, but are particularly concentrated in large towns and cities outside of London and the South East, in former industrial regions such as the North East and South Wales, and in coastal and isolated rural areas. But the COVID-19 pandemic and the recession it's caused has added a new dimension to this very old problem. Using data on the share of workers in shut down sectors, use of the government's furlough scheme, and job vacancies, we construct a measure of each area's exposure to the immediate economic impact of COVID-19. The results are shown here, with darker red indicating areas more economically vulnerable to the pandemic. The current economic crisis has been particularly hard on areas that are heavily reliant on tourism, like Cornwall and the Lake District, and on hospitality-dependent city centres, including large parts of London. For the most part, the places hit hardest by the economic impact of the virus are not the most left behind areas. In this map, we show the areas that are the most left behind and the local authorities that are the most exposed to the economic impact of COVID. Green areas are left behind, but not especially vulnerable to the economic impact of the virus, but areas that are vulnerable to COVID and not left behind are shown in purple. We can see that for the most part, traditionally left behind areas are not those most exposed to the short-term economic impact of COVID-19. And those hit hardest economically by the pandemic are not the most left behind. This complicates the picture with regard to levelling up. There are, however, important exceptions. Areas identified as being both left behind and as having local economies vulnerable to COVID are shown in red. These include a number of hospitality and tourism-dependent coastal communities, such as Blackpool, Great Yarmouth and the Isle of Wight, and the centre of some northern and Scottish cities, such as Liverpool, Glasgow and Dundee, who face the double whammy of being both left behind and vulnerable to the immediate economic fallout from the pandemic. The government will need to bear this in mind when it's designing its levelling up agenda. Visit www.ifs.org.uk/green budget to find out more about this work.